Hello, welcome to this session where we provide you with a new answer to an old question. Why is it that boards of directors and the executive directors can't work together effectively, and how can they do so in a more effective manner? My name is Harold Tessenhoff. I'm currently serving as the executive director of the Coastal Empire Habitat for Humanity based down in Savannah, Georgia. And with me is Ken Schutz of Aligned Influence. And together today we will share some insights that will provide you with some information to answer that question. Through today's session, we're going to focus on 5 main areas. We're going to provide you with a conceptual framework to understand this problem and to begin to give you some terms to address that question. We're then going to take a look at the aligned roles between the executive director and the board of directors, look at the structure which underpins that, introduce you to 3 policy sets that introduce the aligned model of governance that much further. And finally, we're going to conclude that with a process that you can follow to get aligned and stay aligned. So a little bit more about my background and how I was introduced to the work of Aligned Influence and the aligned model of governance. I was serving as an executive director of a Habitat affiliate and was currently was frustrated with the whole question of how do I engage my board members. I found that they fell onto 2 parts of the continuum. They were either very engaged and micromanaging, or they were disengaged. And so I really took a lot of that blame on personally. What could I be doing better? But at the same time feeling burnt out with a lot of work that needed to be done, but yet wanting to say, how could I be a better steward and help create, alongside others, co-create a more enduring affiliate. I took that discussion and concern through Habitat International, and through that was introduced to Ken, who came down and worked with our board of directors, and through the insights that he shared with us, began to realize that it had less to do with personalities and it had more to do with the structure and the systems that we had in place. By following the Aligned Influence model, we began to be better aligned between the executive director and the board of directors. The board of directors began to engage more in the community, created a framework within which I could operate the affiliate on a day-to-day basis. And as a result, over time, we found that we had increased community support. We attracted higher caliber board members from the community to be engaged with the organization. And that affiliate, even though I've since left and moved on to another affiliate, has continued to grow thanks to the work of Aligned Influence. We're now doing the work again in my current affiliate, and using this process of getting aligned and staying aligned, we now realize also that our need now is to how can we make that alignment part of our muscle memory. So without further ado, let me hand over to Ken.
Well, thanks, Harold. That's a great introduction. I think it's great to hear that perspective from the executive director role and understand what it feels like to be there. So my name's Ken Schutz. I'm currently the founder and CEO of Aligned Influence Consulting, but been very involved with habitats around the country for a long time. I really started that out with being on the board of the St. Vrain affiliate in Colorado. What I found in that was that when we started that process, when I started on the board there, I had a room full of really well-intentioned people that really wanted to do the right thing, but were struggling to figure out how to do the right thing. That was a time where I was watching agendas be built the afternoon before the board meeting, and people asking questions. So what should we be talking about today? Again, well-intentioned people trying to do the right thing, but just not having a structure to do it in. What I noticed is that in board meetings times there were a mixture of staff and volunteers there, and that, again, a lot of well-intentioned people, but not even really a good distinction of who the board members were and what they were doing and how what they were doing was different than the staff people that were in the room. That really started to make clear that we needed to actually do some development, and we needed to do some development not just of a board, but of a whole thought process of the way we approach boards and executive directors. Because in fact, in the end, no one was feeling successful. No one was feeling successful. Even though we had a really important mission to move forward in, no one was feeling successful. So in fact, this slide is the slide that I put up now to start the process, start the discussion. Notice the slide with the gears. So what do you think is the problem? What would you say is the problem with that picture? You probably have answers already, but many of them that I get are, well, those gears are disconnected. They're different colors. I hear some people say those gears are disconnected so that they could be going in different directions at different speeds. That the engineers in the room will say, well, that machine will not do any work because in fact there's no way for power to be appropriately transferred from one gear to the second. I think if I now actually put board and executive team over the top of those gears, I think you see the connection that all the things that they would say about the first picture are true about the second picture. That in fact, we could have a situation where really well-intentioned people, board members and executive teams, are going in different speeds at different directions. That they're not connected in a way that power can appropriately transfer from one to the other. That they may actually be feeling successful individually, but together they're not being successful. And they're really frustrated. They don't understand why the good intentions don't get them where they need to be. That really leads to questions that are asked these days. The questions of, so how can I be more successful with my current board of directors? I hear executives saying that. Again, well-intentioned people saying, I want to be more successful, but how can I be more successful? That boards that are saying, how can we be more successful with our executive director? Again, well-intentioned people feeling good about each other, but not feeling good about their way they're being successful together. And then, how is it that we can be more effective? How is it that we can be more effective with the dollars, with the assets that have been put in our control on behalf of those that we're serving? How can we be more effective at doing it? I think it turns out that when I ask that question, and when we form those questions, there's a bunch of old answers that pop up. One of those, it's all about managing the personalities on your board. One of the old answers is it's about the people that are in the room. So you have to have the right people in the room. It's another one, it's all about controlling your board. I would hear executive directors say this. It's all about having the right people and the executive director controlling everything to make sure that it goes well. It's all about my board understanding their role. We've heard this for the last 40 years. Role, 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 role. And role is important. It's really important. But in fact, what we haven't talked about is how we would have those roles aligned in some way. We can define the roles, and for the last 40 years we've defined a role for the board, but we really haven't talked about how they're aligned very well. And in fact, you might hear a board saying it's all about getting the right executive director. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with affiliates where they thought the answer was that they had to get a different executive director. And in fact, that executive director was, again, a well-intentioned person, but they were working inside an environment that just didn't allow them to be successful, allowed the whole organization to be successful.
I think the other thing that's really important, if I can quickly jump in on that, Ken, is the fact that when we get so focused on finding the right people, we really run the risk of undermining the long-term sustainability of the affiliate. Yeah. Because if that person goes, or if something happens, then the whole organization is in jeopardy. And when we think about what our mission is, particularly the growing need for affordable housing and home ownership opportunities, we just can't do that
Yeah.
when we're so focused on personalities.
I think that's right on. I think it's right on. Why this is so important. So in fact, when we think about that, these questions, these answers are not ones that are, they are old questions and answers, the ones that we're asking and answering today. And in fact, we've created some old models to try to approach that. One of the old models we've approached is, we've used is a model that really has its roots in the publicly held for-profit environment. So think about the AT&Ts and GMs and MCIs of the world, that in that model, we would think about these gears being overlapped in such a way that the person at the top of the organization is both the chairman of the board and the CEO or the executive director. And this can happen either where they have both those titles or where they're just acting like they have both those titles. And the problem is that in those situations, we know that the end result of that has been not good. That the outcome has been, after the 2008 crisis, that we actually have some executives of these publicly held for-profit companies that were indicted for harming investors. And in fact, the dirty little secret is this model is actually seeping into some nonprofits because they think, gosh, that's what we ought to be doing. And sometimes it's because the people that are on the boards of organizations are in those for-profit companies, and they're bringing in what they think is working in their company. The second model that we see being used is one that really has had its birth in the nonprofit world, often today called international policy governance, having its roots in the Carver governance work, and that in that we actually say to the board, your role is to define the ends, limit the means, and stay out of everything else. And by doing that, the picture that we develop is now these gears, these entities actually being on purpose separated, and in fact putting a, if you will, a big black curtain between the two of them, and telling the board it's not your job to peek on the other side. Don't go over there. That's not your role. And so in fact, if you look at the picture, we really haven't solved the alignment problem with that yet either. In fact, we've maybe even exacerbated the problem to some extent. So that really leads, when we understand those pictures, the old structures, it leads to some new questions. So new questions like, why does your affiliate have a board? I think this is really an important question. And we think we know the answer until we get asked the answer. Why does your affiliate have a board? Well, most would end up saying, my affiliate has a board because the government requires me to have a board. So why is it the government requires you to have a board? If we think about it, we sort of reverse engineer that question, and we think about the kinds of organizations that are required to have boards. We end up understanding that it's publicly held for-profits and it's nonprofits in the corporate structures. And in the municipal side, municipalities, counties, and all of the kinds of authorities that they can create, required to have boards. So what's similar about all of those? Well, you don't have to look very far to figure out that what's similar is that they're all managing somebody else's money. The for-profit is managing the investor's money, the nonprofit is managing the donor's money, the civic organization are managing the taxpayer's money. So it's really easy to see that if we walk that backwards, that the government said, if you're going to manage somebody else's money, there ought to be a board in place to provide some oversight to that. So if that's true, who leads your affiliate? Is it your executive director, or is it your board chair, your board of directors? Usually when I ask that question, people will say, well, that's a trick question because we both lead. And my answer is, you're probably right. How's that working for you? How's that working for you for both to lead the organization? Because in fact, when you both tried to lead the organization, now we get into those essentially power struggles. What's your role? What's my role? How do we lead this together? And in fact, understanding that some of those words that we use, like lead, probably just aren't finite enough or distinct enough to help us pull this apart. So what's the role of your board? What's the role of your executive director? So we talked about with the old models, actually with the old nonprofit model, we actually spent a lot of time defining a role for the board, which included stay out of everything else, don't look on the other side. But we really have never tried to define a unique or a complementary role for the executive, even though they have some sense of what they're supposed to be doing. But we don't really understand how it relates to what the board's doing. Who does your board protect? Really important question. And if we think about the definition of why you have a board, I think it becomes pretty clear that the board has been set up, the government thinks the board's role is to protect the investors, the people whose money that they are managing, either the investors, the donors, or the taxpayers. But I don't think you have to look very far with me to understand that sometimes boards have fallen into the trap of thinking they're protecting the executive or they're protecting the organization rather than protecting those that are investing in the organization. As soon as we understand that, now a lot of things start to fall into place that we didn't understand before. And finally, is your affiliate sustainable? Is it sustainable? I think that really is what Harold spoke to a few minutes ago, in that we start to learn that there are a whole bunch of things outside the organization that could affect your sustainability. The economy, natural disasters, all those kinds of things can either positively or negatively affect your sustainability, but you have control of almost none of them. The thing that you do have control over is your own organization and your own structure, and how you can make that sustainable so that when those other things happen, you can sustain through those. So, new answer. The new answer would be one in which we align these organizations, these people in the organization, the board of directors and the executive and their team, in such a way that they are aligned, in such a way that power can appropriately transfer to the other, in such a way that they can't go at different speeds in different directions, that they are aligned and they're locked together as they move forward. To do that, we have to align those influencers. We have to define them as influencers and help them understand how they uniquely influence the organization, and then how those unique influences are aligned. Which gets us to that point of talking about these aligned roles. So as we think about this, the aligned role of the board of directors is to direct, protect, and enable, and we'll define that more as we go on. The role of the executive is to lead, manage, and accomplish. And so if we understand that, and we understand how we can understand them vertically and we can understand them horizontally, now we can think about that differently. So, aligned roles of the board of directors. The aligned role of the board, first, is to direct. Direct means to define the product, service, or value that's supposed to be delivered by the organization. Really, the outcome of this is answering the questions: who are we supposed to serve? What are we supposed to do for those people we serve? And as we do that, what ideals should we maintain? So that the executive and the executive team understands where they should be going, who should they be serving, and what ideals they should be maintaining as they do that. Protect. To protect the organization, to protect the investors of the organization, the interests of those investors, donors, taxpayers, in such a way that we establish boundaries around operational issues. We have ways of, the board has ways now of monitoring the organization, where the organization is going, in a different way than just looking at the operational dashboard. Because I see that so often, that the operational dashboard is what the board is using to determine if the organization is doing the right things and staying in the right place. But they haven't really defined protective boundaries that would be different than those. And then finally, to enable. To enable the organization, that is to advocate for the organization. I talk about that as wearing their organization around on their lapel, such a way that every conversation they have at work and at coffee and at church or wherever they are could become a conversation about that affiliate. And then to turn those advocacy relationships into resource development relationships just by surfacing what are the challenges and opportunities of the affiliate and what are the talents and resources that those people have and how they might connect. So when we think that, Harold, would you talk about the executive roles?
Certainly. So the executive's roles fall into three categories and can be accomplished by three words: to lead, to manage, and to accomplish. So if the board of directors, let's start with the whole concept of lead. If the board of directors, in terms of defining the product and listening to the community, has set a large goal in terms of what is the product and the service that the organization is going to deliver, the executive director now is able to take that, begin to work on 3 to 5 year plans, looking at what does our program going to look like that allows us to accomplish that goal that the board has set as part of its direct policy. What is the staffing levels that are going to be required for that? What level of resources are we going to need in order to be able to accomplish that? Let's slip down into manage. So as an executive director, I have programmatic staff. If part of the protect policies of the organization govern how we are to manage our assets, how we are to treat our clients, and in the case of a Habitat for Humanity affiliate, we can think of those clients as being the people who buy our homes, whom we partner with to accomplish that, the volunteers who come onto our sites. So how do we treat that? Well, in the case of our home buyer selection process, we need to have a policy in place that respects the boundaries that have been set by Habitat International and by the board of directors. But then how do we go about selecting those partner families? What are the processes that we use to follow that? And what are the guidelines that we use to underwrite our mortgages? And then accomplish. So working with my programmatic staff now, what I'm going to be held accountable for in working with them is, are we accomplishing those plans, those 3 to 5 year plans, breaking it down even on an annual basis? How are we tracking? If we said we were going to serve 7 families this year, how are we moving along that track as we move closer towards that? So now, Ken, I'm going to hand back to you as we talk a little bit more about how we order and put those two together.
Yeah, so if you think back to the picture of the 6 words together, direct, protect, enable, lead, manage, and accomplish, really what we've done in the last few minutes is we defined those vertically. But if we take a step back and we now think about defining those horizontally, or looking at them horizontally, now all of a sudden what appears is ordered pairs of influence. So ordered pairs of influence that now help us understand how these unique roles are aligned. So if we think about the first one, about thinking about the future, the board's role about thinking about the future, just back up for a second, this is one of those places that often has been in the past, has been one of those power struggles. Are you in charge about thinking about the future, or am I? When we now can say that there's an aligned way of thinking about the future. The board's role of thinking about the future is to think about the direction the organization is to go, who's to be served, what's to be accomplished for those people we serve, and what ideals are to be maintained, and how that direction is changing over time by the board constantly engaging with that set of stakeholders, external stakeholders, to make sure they understand how the needs are changing over time.
And now we've, as part of the executive director's lead role, we'd spoken about that 3 to 5 year plan that sits down and begins to take that and say, all right, what are the resources? What are, for example, in the case of a Habitat affiliate, let's say that 2 of the goals are that the board has set are in terms of our products and services, may very well be how many houses are we going to be building? What are the levels of resources that are necessary to sustain that? It may also engage questions coming out of those listening sessions about how do we diversify our sources of income, because some of the areas that we know that we've traditionally relied on may be drying up. So we need to be looking, do we open a new restore? And then what would the steps be as we lead into that?
Yeah. The second ordered pair of influences is this layer around the day-to-day. What happens as we operate the organization? So who thinks about that? Does the board think about that, or does the executive? Well, very traditionally we've said board, you stay out of that. But now we can think about that as ordered pairs of influence, that the board's role in the day-to-day is actually protecting that. That is setting these operational boundaries to say to the executive, you can do anything you want, just don't cross these boundaries as you serve clients, or as you manage finances, or as you manage risk. Here are the boundaries that will keep you safe. And at the same time, the executive is
basically managing. So what we do is, within those boundaries that have been laid down by the board, the executive director now sits down and takes those and develops more clear policies and procedures and steps that can be followed. So, for example, if one of the areas that we need, where there's a protect policy, has to do with some of the clients, one group of clients that Habitat affiliates have are our volunteers. And one thing we want to ensure that volunteers have a safe, productive experience with affiliates. I mean, after all, we have construction sites. There are some liabilities and risks that are out there. So for the executive director to then sit down and say, well, what is our safety policy? Working with his or her programmatic staff to come up with a safety policy which they can then follow with procedures out in the field or in the restore, and regularly monitor to ensure that we are keeping volunteers safe and productive.
Yeah. The third ordered pair of influence is this area of do roles. So what does the board do and what does the executive do? Actually, this has been missing for the last 40 years, especially for the board. What's the do role? So the do role of the board is to enable the work of the organization. Enable means to advocate for the organization, to understand that they are primarily thinking outside the organization, understanding who the stakeholders are, and engaging with those stakeholders and enabling conversations, being able to talk about all the challenges and all the opportunities that the organization has in front of it, and listen for the talents and resources that people have in the community and how those talents and resources might help the affiliate accomplish what they want to accomplish. And then being able to match those things, to introduce people so that those talents and resources can be applied to the challenges and the opportunities that the affiliate has.
And if you now take it over to the accomplish side, and let's continue with that theme of advocating for the organization. The staff's role is, how do we support that? How do we provide information to the board that allows them to have those engaging and informed conversations with stakeholders, whether they're elected officials, potential donors, or just members of the community at large? How do we create events such as, for example, house dedications, ensuring that board members are there, and are events that board members can invite people to? And I think as advocacy grows within the Habitat movement, and as affiliates are asked to step into that role so that it accompanies our traditional home building role, staff become really important conduits of information. And training to board members so that board members are equipped to really be successful in that role. Because as they advocate more, that also opens up more opportunities for resources to flow into the organization.
Right, and just carrying that just a bit further, when it comes to the accomplishing role, it is the executive director and their team that are actually going to accomplish the work. They're the ones that are going to build the houses. They're the ones that are going to engage the volunteers. They're the ones that are going to develop the programs that will actually harvest the resources out of the community. And the board is really enabling that. So we think about that ordered pair of influence now in such a way that, again, the power is appropriately transferred and being complementary to each other. What we can do, we can say the same thing. We can take this alignment even into the leadership roles. So thinking about the leader of the board being the chair of the board, now all of a sudden the board chair's role becomes very clear. The board chair, their role is to ensure the discipline of the board, That is to make sure the board is focusing on directing, protecting, enabling, and not moving over into the leading, managing, accomplishing, because there's a lot that they have to direct, protect, and enable. That their role really is to make sure to facilitate the work of the board. So now thinking about annual calendars, thinking about agendas that reflect what's in that annual calendar, and making sure that every meeting has the documents that they're going to need so the board can do its work at that time. Again, now really thinking about directing, protecting, enabling in those board meetings.
And I think also the other thing is the board president and the executive director are the respective points of contact, so that the executive director, in reporting to the board reports to the board of directors through the board president, and the board and then is also the staff contact, so that we don't have myriads of people moving back and forth between that, but so that there is discipline in that role. But what that then enables the executive director to do is to ensure that the work is accomplished, that staff have given proper direction and leadership and are led to ensure that the work of the organization is being accomplished, that we're living into the mission, that families are being served and volunteers are being engaged into the work as well, and providing that there is good organization to support those daily operations. But then that there are regular reports that are coming up that are shared with the board through the board president.
Yeah, that alignment continues. Now we can talk about alignment of committees in the organization, because now all of a sudden it becomes clear that there are some committees that are board committees. What's the role of a board committee? To help the board direct, protect, and enable. So we start to understand that there are some very unique kinds of committee opportunities that the board would have. I always say that if there are more than about 4 committees of a board, that it starts to raise a red flag for me, that they might be moving over into the other kinds of committees. But something like an executive committee, a succession or a nominating committee, a finance or an audit committee, and then some kind of a committee that would be helping the board enable, like community development or community engagement, something like that. But all of a sudden, we understand that board committees are helping the board do their work.
Whereas operational committees are now under the purview of the executive director. They're either chaired by the executive director or a senior program staff person. And they deal with operational issues. So in the case of a Habitat for Humanity affiliate, this would be a homeowner selection committee, a restore committee if an affiliate has a restore, a resource development or fundraising committee, potentially a marketing committee. So any committees that are concerned with the operational work that enable and allow the staff to accomplish the work of the organization, that mobilize resources and volunteers to ensure that families are served in the case of a Habitat affiliate.
Yeah. The alignment continues, because now we can actually talk about alignment of policy sets in the organization. Turns out that in a mature, aligned organization, there are going to be 3 sets of policies. The first set are policies that establish the organization. Sometimes we don't even call them policies. They have different names: bylaws, charters, things that are used to establish an affiliate. Often an affiliate, it's bylaws and maybe the HFHI covenant that establishes and continues the relationship between Habitat International and the affiliate. Second group of policies are governing policies. So these are policies that the board creates and helps the board do their work of directing, protecting, and enabling the organization. So in fact, you can imagine that would have a directing section, a protecting section, and an enabling section of their policies. And finally, operating policies. Now these are policies, operating policies are the policies that the executive creates, and those are the ones that guide the work of the staff and volunteers to make sure that the work that should be done is done, and that it's done in an appropriate way that builds the right kind of houses and does it in a safe and appropriate way. I think that that really that leads us to this place of thinking about if we think about where Habitat is today and how we've approached that. I think Harold has some great insights.
So if we think about it, Habitat affiliates are by their very nature very complex organizations. We have anywhere around between 4 and 6, depending on the size and the scope of your affiliate, different types of activities that we undertake. We're a construction company. We're a mortgage originator and servicer. We're a traditional nonprofit in the sense that we mobilize volunteers and donors and are accountable for that. We often have a restore, so we're a retailer. And then we're also a developer. We develop either working in a neighborhood revitalization sense, or maybe we're taking on a new area because our area, the service area where we're working, simply needs many homes, and the existing infrastructure needs to be extended to make that happen. The thing that we find is Habitat for Humanity, we're an agency of doers. We come together, and what most people associate us with is the construction of homes. And so for many people that come onto the board of directors, their point of entry into and introduction to Habitat for Humanity is a construction site, Ken. They've come out either as part of a church group or their company, or friends that have brought them out, and they've continued to be engaged, and next thing they're asked to be on the board of directors because they have clearly got that habititis that they've got. So they make this transition into being board members. Alternatively, what I'm beginning to see, which is so helpful, because Habitat is now a mature organization in length of time, we're having younger board members come on, and their point of entry was they came on an alternative spring break. They did Collegiate Challenge, or they were part of a campus chapter. But there's not often that preparation to understand the complexities of the organization, and then what does that mean when I'm serving as a board member. So as a result, we've got resources that are out there. There are policies that are out there. But what we do is we cut and paste them, we adopt them, but we don't really learn them. And so there's few opportunities for us to get in and really practice and really make this a transformational process. And finally, I think in Habitat, because we are so concerned about serving families, because we serve the need, we haven't spent the necessary resources and time to really do the development of our organization so we can be a mature organization going forward. And so we focused on if we have the right people, if we have the right policies, but really the key thing that we've got to realize and have missed, I think it so many times, is that it's about aligning these roles and bringing these things into alignment. And so Ken's going to talk a little bit more about that process of how do we get ourselves aligned, and then most importantly, stay aligned.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I think that what Harold just said is absolutely right, and that concept of that the urgent screams and the important whispers, and that what this is important. That it's important that we mature ourselves, mature our affiliates in such a way that they understand how to make sure that we're using the resources of the donors in an effective way. So doing that, really, we've identified really four steps. One of those is that you first need to check, are you aligned? Or how out of a line are you? So you really have to take some time to evaluate that. When you think about that image of the gears being misaligned, how does that start to describe some of the things you see going on today in your organization? Second step is really to fix that by getting them aligned. That transformation that Harold talked about, a process of making sure that you can understand how you're working today, understand what's misaligned today, and then get yourself aligned so that you understand these aligned roles and you understand how to play these aligned roles out, not just in the short term, but in the long term. Because the last piece, or the third piece, is actually locking that alignment into place with things that you do every year, because we know that board members are going to cycle off your board, that you're going to have new members of the executive team, and that anything you put in place one moment and expect it to stay in place is not going to stay there unless you are intentional about it staying there, of making sure that alignment is staying in place, that the organization is staying aligned with its stakeholders, that the board is staying aligned with the executive team, that the policy structures are staying aligned with each other as they move forward, that the staff and the board understand how those things play out, and not just the chairman of the board and the chairperson of the board and the executive director, but the everybody. How does everybody fit into that? And finally, the fourth step really is using that alignment then to drive effectiveness throughout the rest of the organization. Because what we found is that alignment will drive effectiveness. Alignment is actually the key to effectiveness. And that alignment will, that you model at the very top of the organization, will start to filter down through just because it will. And then there are some things that you can do to actually intentionally drive that forward and intentionally think about the development of members of your executive team as they more clearly understand those roles. And all of that really gets to the point of allowing the executive director to operate the affiliate with a clear understanding of where the organization is going, and clear boundaries, and for the board to really understand its role, so that they're not constantly asking, what should we be doing? They understand what they should be doing from the first day they come into the organization. And it allows them now to be outward focused, because so many boards have ended up becoming internally focused that there's no one really having that intentional outward focus.
So we hope that as you've listened and watched this presentation today, that you've gotten some new insights as well, but we also know that you will have possibly more questions. So what did you hear today that might help your affiliate to function more effectively? What questions do you have that you need to get answered? And what needs to happen at your affiliate so that you can be more aligned and more effective? So with that, we wanted to just share our contact information, which will be on the slide now in front of you. Know that we're available to share additional insights, perhaps provide you with some answers, and undoubtedly have some questions to ask you as you dig down deeper into that process.
All the best as you move forward, and stay aligned.